When you're an entrepreneur, sometimes you have to pivot from one thing to another. And in today's episode of the I Can't See You podcast, I'm going to talk to a blind entrepreneur who had to do just that when things weren't going as he expected them to go.
From Studio C, welcome to the I Can't See You podcast with David. He can't see, but he's got a lot to say and a face for radio.
Hello there, and welcome to episode 72 of the I Can't See You podcast. My name is David, at David Benj on all the socials, and I have a very exciting guest on today, and I'll bring him on in a minute. But before I do, I want to pass along some sad news. My friend Christopher Doherty, who I know I've mentioned more than once on this podcast, passed away last Wednesday, the 22nd, and I was so shocked and so saddened by his sudden death that I just can't begin to tell you. Every day I think about him, and there's so many things that over the course of my life that we've talked about, and you know, it's kind of funny. When I do a podcast episode, there's a few people that I have in mind when I'm doing it. My friend Dan, my friend Alex, and Chris. And I found out over the weekend, one of Liz's friends, her college roommate, Eileen, also listens. Eileen, I appreciate you listening. And again, happy birthday last week to you. But back to Chris, when I was recording that episode last week with Roy Samuelson, I thought, wow, I can't wait for Chris to hear this, because he would text me and say, oh, this was a great episode, or, you know, oh, I really like that, or could you tell me more about this? And you know, like I mentioned those others, same thing. I'll text Dan and say, hey, does this sound okay? Or I'll text Alex and say, hey, will you listen to this? It sounds a little funny. Chris was one of them. Chris was one of those three that I would think about when I'm doing an episode. I think, okay, this is for this person. And he is my avatar. And he was one of my avatars. And to think back, you know, Liz works at the Walden School in media. Chris is the one that told us about the Walden School. A mutual friend of ours had sent their son there, and you know, told Chris about it. And then, you know, Chris sent, you know, his oldest child there, and then all the others. And so it was, you know, a lot of things that have gone on. You know, I saw a Sixers game this year. I went with him. I think you remember that episode a couple months back. Gave me Flyers tickets. First Flyers game I'd been to in quite a while. Liz and I went. It's just sad. It's just sad and shocking. I'll post a link to Chris's obituary over on the show notes page. That'll be at ican'tseeyou.com/072. I Can't See You, remember, is spelled ICANTCU. It sounds like a whole sentence, but it really is only 7 letters. And I think Chris would have enjoyed meeting today's guest, although my guest is from Houston, and he has pivoted a few years back from one thing to another. He is known as the Blind Blogger. You can catch him on theblindblogger.net and the What's Your Excuse podcast. He is my friend, Maxwell Ivey. Max, I really appreciate you coming on today's show.
Well, thanks for having me, David. Really appreciate being on the show. I also appreciate getting to know you in person and spending some time with you, something that doesn't generally happen with podcast hosts and guests. And really appreciate you coming on my show as well.
Yeah, and that was great. That was it was a good talk that we had there, and you know, just getting to know folks. You know, I was thinking about it earlier today. You know, the people that I met at Podfest, you, Lee, Chip, Alex, Sanfilippo, David Bennett, for God's sakes, he basically is how most of us got together, I think, you know, with those the Zoom calls before. And you know, just outstanding. And thinking back, you know, I went to Podcast Movement a few years ago, and I basically, it was a little different because I, you know, was in Philadelphia, so I didn't stay over every afternoon. Once it was done, I jumped on the train and went home. So I didn't have those connections. I made a couple of connections, and those folks actually helped me get going, starting the podcast, just like, you know, like you try to do with your session at Podfest, and you know, just your inspiring story. And it is a very inspiring story, you know, between being an author and so intrigued by your the selling of the used equipment that which we'll touch on in a little bit, and just being a public speaker and being inspirational to folks both who have sight and who don't. I cater on my podcast mostly to folks who have sight, and just they want to learn more. They want to know how they can help folks who don't have sight. And I also want to show them, like I say, blind people for dummies. Hey, we can do all these things, just like you can. I mean, listen, we're not going to jump in a plane and fly it, but for the most part, we can do it. Sometimes it takes a lot longer, and I don't know about you, but it's very frustrating to me when something takes so long. So it's just, some of the things that you've done are just, so inspiring to everyone, not just to blind folks, but as you say, if you and I can do something, everybody should be able to do it.
Right. And I think one of the things that we do a disservice to the general public as a blind community is I think we should make a better effort to include sighted people in our regional and national conventions of the various advocacy groups. I think that, as me and you recently learned with you and I at Podfest, and allowing people who are sighted to see two blind people with different levels of abilities and different levels of willingness to use the skills they have, we gave them just a little taste. But imagine if we could get, say, 20 or 30 or 50 people with sight to attend the next NFB Pennsylvania State Convention, and let them see the wide variety of people that are represented with vision loss.
Right. I mean, and that's, just what I've found is that, people think, it's all or none as far as sight goes. And people, just like in any kind of community, everybody has different ways of doing things, different skill sets. I'm dressed in a black t-shirt. I wear a black t-shirt almost every day, unless they're all dirty, then I put something else on. And I realized earlier today, I said, oh, I should have worn the shirt that Max gave me, but I was already dressed. So once I'm dressed, then I'm not changing. But it's, and I know you're probably dressed nicely, which, is very rare for me, funerals, meetings that are important, things like that. And you always look really good. And, I'm, not that, if I have to, I do, but for the most part, I don't. And I get it because of the line of work that you're trying to build clientele as a publicist, and you're going on different shows and things like that. So it's important. But, overall, just like in the sighted community, some people do things differently than others. Blind people are the same way. Some cook more, some cook less. Some go more places, some don't leave the house.
Yeah. True.
And that's there's a there's a girl in our NFB chapter, and she has this white cane. Now she's probably, I think she's a little bit shorter than me. I'm 5'8", maybe she's 5'5". Her cane probably isn't as long as your leg. And it looks like when she's walking around, we're saying to her, Donna, where'd you get that cane? It looks like she's like doing a magic spell, because she's got it out in front of her, waving it around, not down on the ground, because she'd have to almost bend over to use it. And so she's not very comfortable going out. And, part of the reason is that. So, it's just everybody is a little bit different. And
right. And back to your clothing example, whether you love him or hate him, Bill Belichick has 6 Super Bowl rings, and he wears a hoodie to work.
Right.
Zuckerberg's one of the 10 wealthiest men in the world, and they had to almost bring in brainwashing experts to get him to put on a suit to go speak to Congress.
Right.
I do. People should have seen me when I gave a talk to the Foundation Fighting Blindness 3 years ago now, and I had long black or brown, and a lot of it gray hair down past my shoulders. I was wearing a black denim shirt, jeans, and tennis shoes. And thankfully, after the talk, a lady came up to me. Her name is Chelsea Nguyen. She runs a business called CN Vision Image Consulting, and she came up to me and wanted to know about creating a video library of non-visual techniques for style and grooming. She wanted to create it for a pay subscription-based video library for the blind and also people with other disabilities. And after she asked me about that, she's like, Max, considering what you want to do, I think I could help you. And I listened to her, and it took an entire day, which at the end of it, I had a lot more respect for people in the fashion industry. I have a lot more respect for models now after spending a whole day having my hair done, being changed in and out of clothes, and having hundreds, if not thousands, of pictures taken in all sorts of different positions with different lighting. At the end of the day, I went home and didn't wake up till the next day. And she helped me understand the importance of doing it. And now it's to the point where I really, to me, putting on the shirt and tie and the jacket is no different than putting on the jeans and a shirt. I will admit that I do love the virtual stuff because, nobody right now is putting on pants. I mean, we don't have to wear the slacks or the hard shoes, as they call them, and
Right.
and you heard me walk. My dress shoes probably weigh 5 pounds. What I mean? So this is a lot more enjoyable, but it's gotten to the point where it's become very natural. It's taken 2 years to get there. The only thing I really regret about the whole suit and tie thing is now it takes from the time I start my shower, it takes me about an hour to be ready to leave the house or the motel room. And so that's, I spent 40 years traveling around the world, 20 years traveling around the country with the carnival, where, pretty much every day I would, put on my jeans and my shoes and go and be done,
Right. Right. That is, I was thinking about it this morning while I was getting dressed, and I was putting on the black t-shirt, and I'm thinking, Max is very similar. My father-in-law, he would go out, and if he's cutting the grass, maybe if it was really warm, he wouldn't wear his jacket, but he would have a dress shirt on. And again, if it wasn't too warm, maybe even a tie.
No.
And it's just, Mark Riccobono, who's president of the National Federation of the Blind, when I did some training down there for NFB Newsline, we were told that the corporate culture there is to suit and tie, because he wants to show that, just because we're blind doesn't mean that we can't, look nice and we, and dress nice. And fortunately, while I was there, I was doing training, and I was not wearing a suit and tie. It was, either a black t-shirt or a black turtleneck. And if it was cold, maybe I had a flannel over top of that. But,
Yeah.
look, when you're, depending on your business, when you're doing that, it looks good and people take you seriously when you're dressed that way. There's no doubt in my mind. And I just think that's great about you, looking the part that you're trying to portray. But let's go back, growing up, your family owned carnivals. So, and you mentioned you traveled around a lot. Are you originally from Texas?
Yeah, I'm originally from Texas. My grandfather was originally from Nebraska, and him and his family moved to Texas after the restaurant they were running went out of business in the beginning of the Depression.
Okay.
And after basically just surviving for a while, they ended up in the operating games on one of the Carnival Midways, and my grandfather started got his first rides in the early 50s. And at one time, my family had a carnival. We had the smallest carnival in the family at 7 or 8 rides. And I had three uncles who all owned carnivals. My uncle Robert, my uncle Shorty, and my uncle Albert. And in fact, my Uncle Albert, his son, and now his grandsons are operating the family carnival. They call it Wagner's Kitty Carnival, but it has, I think, over 30 rides now, and they're moving probably $5 to $10 million worth of equipment. They travel from Corpus Christi to Nebraska and back every year. They operate 50 weeks out of the year. You know, they're big time compared to anything I ever had any personal experience with. So, but they're still in the business, and occasionally they even ask me to help them sell a ride. Although, you know, I've yet to actually sell a ride for them, and I'm kind of disappointed in that because me and my uncle, our families competed pretty strongly over bookings. They had more rides, but my dad was a nicer person. People could depend on him to show up and give them a full accounting of what the committee had coming at the end of the weekend.
Okay.
And so we would often have events bigger than our carnival was capable of supporting. And a lot of times they thought that they should have had those events on their calendar.
Okay.
So we competed pretty bitterly with them. And in 2007, when our carnival finally went out of business and we had to find somewhere else to work, we decided to become part of their midway, and that was not fun. And it led to depression. And you know, I was somebody who was never really healthy anyway. It led to me putting on a lot more weight, having a health emergency, and then eventually convincing my family that one, I needed to quit the midway because I wasn't happy being there, and I wasn't making any money there. And two, that I really needed to go all in and start this website, start helping people sell their used rides so that I'd have something to do that I did enjoy doing.
Right. And it's something, you know, obviously growing up in it, you kind of knew, and you knew the rides, and you knew, you know, how they operated and things like that. It's as a kid, and so I guess did you spend a lot of time traveling even as a, I
Well,
know you,
the business has changed. When I was a kid, carnivals only operated, even in Texas, they only operated 8 months out of the year.
okay.
You'd work from March till October, and then everybody'd have to get what they would call their a wintertime hustle or a wintertime job until the spring. And you would work on your equipment and you'd go after new bookings, or you'd try to hang on to the ones you had last year. So
Okay.
what would happen is that we would when when the carnival had to continue working. So what would happen is from March till May, most of us kids would stay with other relatives that were retired. And then in June, July, and August, you'd join your family and you'd travel with them. Sometimes you'd be on the midway, sometimes you'd be in house trailers, and sometimes you would be with babysitters or daycare people in the town that you were working in, just depending on what was available. And then at the end of the summer, because back then school didn't start again till Labor Day, somebody would bring the kids back home to Houston, and the rest of the family would continue working until the end of the season. So
Okay.
they only really had to worry about us kids on the midways for 3 months out of the year.
Okay. And how was that? How was being on that, especially once you lost your sight? How did you manage to do things? And I'm guessing you weren't just there as you grew older. I'm assuming you became, a little more active and started doing actual work on the at an event.
Right. Well, what they did is they would find work for me.
Okay.
The general belief was that if he's working, then we don't have to worry about him getting into trouble, possibly getting injured. And of course, it didn't hurt to have extra, almost free labor. So I started losing my vision. I have RP, retinitis pigmentosa. I started losing my vision when I was 4 or 5 years old, and it was very gradual in the beginning. When I turned 5, my grandmother put me to work in her cotton candy wagon, and At first, my job was to box the popcorn, because back then they actually put it in cardboard boxes and put the butter on it.
Okay.
After that, she would let me put the syrup on the snow cones. But back then, our equipment was kind of dangerous to operate, so they would let me bag the popcorn, but they wouldn't let me run the machine that made the popcorn.
Okay.
They would let me make the snow cones, but they wouldn't let me put the ice in the grinding part of it and run the machine that made the ice for the snow.
Okay.
And then also they would, I'd end up working what's called calling people into games. I worked the puck rack, which is where you throw the ball and knock the stuffed cats down. I worked ring toss. Most of the time I worked the duck pond game, which is where they pick up the ducks and the numbers on the bottom of them tell them what they win.
Right. Okay.
They win something every time. About 95% of them win some little nothing toy. Every once in a while, somebody wins a good prize. But that's what they would have me do. And as I got older, I participated in trying to get bookings for the carnival. And I started making cold calls for people when I was 12 or 13 years old, and started sending letters to people, because back then you still would write letters instead of, so I did that. Also, about the time I turned 12, I had the traditional big decrease in vision that a lot of men with RP have when they go through puberty. So that was when I started learning how to use a white cane. I started doing the orientation and mobility training for crossing streets and riding buses and, managing an airport or a train station. It's also when I learned to read Braille, although I didn't really use Braille much from the time I got out of high school on until maybe a couple of years ago. So, but I learned the Braille, learned the independent living skills like cooking and cleaning and maintaining your clothing, that sort of stuff. When I graduated, also during my high school years, I became part of a scout troop for visually impaired in Houston. It was Troop 962. It was sponsored by the Bell Telephone Pioneers, and many of their executives here in the area actually participated in some of our events, like our annual fishing day, and a trip to the Space Center and things like that. They would help out with, and I accumulated the skill awards and the merit badges and the projects, so that I'm one of the few blind Eagle Scouts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when I graduated from high school, I had my Eagle and my diploma. I went off to college, and my intent was to become a lawyer, because it never hurts in the carnival business to have somebody who's an attorney.
Okay.
Because I never really wanted to leave the business, but it was a matter of finding a place for me in the business that would allow me to be really successful. And unfortunately, my grades and/or my LSAT, the law school admissions test, were not good enough to get admitted. And at that time, my university did not have their own law school, so I couldn't take advantage of the usual arrangement that where most schools give a preference to their own graduates.
Okay.
So as many people don't know this, in most of the United States, when you graduate from college and you get your diploma, that's the end of pretty much any assistance you're going to get from the state agencies, as far as tuition support, as far as help with room and board or readers. That stuff pretty much all ends, and then you have to go into the student loan program. And of course, they will allow you to borrow more money to cover some of the costs that blind people have that other students don't have, but you eventually have to pay that money back. So instead of, after I didn't get into law school, instead of going to graduate school, I went to the Lions World Services for the Blind program and became an automated collections specialist for the Internal Revenue Service. And I did that for 3 years. I hated just about every day of it. And part of it was, I mean, there were several reasons. One is the call center they sent me to was an experimental call center, so it didn't look anything like what they told us to expect in our training.
Okay.
The other thing was they really didn't know what they were going to do with me beyond answering the phones and talking to irate taxpayers / customers who had just gotten that infamous certified registered letter that says all the mean, nasty things we could do to you if you don't take care of this now. And I can't tell you how many times I would press that button and the phone call would start with somebody crying. It was hardly ever good. And the book at the time for our call center said that no one person should be on primary incoming calls for more than 30 consecutive days. When I quit, I had been on primary incoming calls for over 100 days.
Oh my gosh.
And in my 2.5 years there, I handled 4 suicide threats. One of them I handled so well that the taxpayer came down to the office wanting to meet with Mr. Ivey and thank him personally, to which the IRS people in our walk-in area had to explain to him, sir, he's blind, and there's only one computer in this building that he can use. And if he doesn't access the computer, he can't talk to you. So we can't let you go up there, and there's really no way he can come down here. So he eventually sent me a nice letter. That's one of the great things about Apple is you can pretty much walk into an Apple store or up to anybody that has an Apple terminal, and you can press a couple of keys and it will talk. But that wasn't the way it used to be. And it definitely wasn't the way it was in the Internal Revenue Service. I had one computer in the entire building, and no, I never broke it. I never messed with it. I had days where I thought about, if this computer doesn't work, I can't work either.
There you go.
And eventually I got to the point where every day I had to have a conversation with myself about, do I want to go to work today or do I want to call in sick? And if I call in sick, do I want to risk them, writing me up, sending me for training, or possibly firing me? And I have to have that talk with myself every day. And then eventually I said, carneying is hard, but it's a whole lot easier than this stuff. So, so I went home, and I only have 3 regrets from quitting the Internal Revenue Service. One, I should have hung around until March, because quitting in December is no fun. You go home, to a house full of people and no money coming in. 2, I wish I had taken advantage of the credit I had at the time and bought a ride or a nice game trailer or something before I quit. And 3, I wish I had known that under their rules, I could have basically said, okay, I'm going to quit when my paid time and my sick leave runs out. So, I could have been on their books and been sitting in my house doing nothing for like 3 or 4 months, because I hardly ever took my leave.
Oh, wow.
So I basically left, they were paying me about $1,400 a month. So I basically left about $4,000 or $5,000 cash on the table when I quit.
Wow. What college did you go to?
I started off at Blinn Junior College in Brenham, and then I went to Texas A&I University in Kingsville, Texas, and that did not go well.
Okay.
And then I transferred and eventually graduated from Corpus Christi State University, which is now known as Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi. And
Gotcha.
I was part of the first graduating class from it as part of the Texas A&M system. So I get to claim being a Texas an Aggie, which is kind of a big thing in Texas, but it's not really the same thing.
Right. That's how, when you mentioned the college, I'd never thought to ask you about that. And, my daughter graduated last year, and whenever we see, or when she started looking for work, oh yeah, this person went to, and when she's not working from our living room or dining room table, back when everything gets back to normal and she's in New York City, she'll say, oh yeah, I work with this person and they went to Fordham. And it's usually, NYU, Fordham, or Pace, or one of the schools in New York. It's occasionally, though, it's some other schools that, maybe she looked at or considered. And, it always, when we looked at colleges, I judged them on one thing. It wasn't what kind of education she was going to get there. Some of it was where it was going to be, but most of it was what are their colors and what's the mascot / logo that go on the sports things that I'm going to be wearing for the next however many years down the line. And
I'm glad to see you had your priorities straight.
Yeah.
Because it's because of Bulldog, and because of Bulldog is cool, but I don't know if they've changed it because I haven't really kept in touch with Corpus Christi's sports teams. But when I attended Texas A&M Corpus Christi, our mascot was the Crabs. We had a nationally ranked Division III volleyball team at the time, so. For those who don't know, Division III is like, it's not even North Dakota State, Montana, quality of competition. I'm sure that those kids were happy having their scholarship and living right on the beach.
Right. And again, and continuing to be able to play something that they really like. And that's, my daughter played softball, and when she picked the school that she picked, which is Pace University, they have 2 campuses, and she chose the one she wanted, which was in the city, because of the internships of what she wanted to go into. She is also in PR. She's beauty PR, and they her company had some layoffs, and she made the cut. So it's been nice that she still has work, and again, she's working from here instead of their offices in New York City. But she didn't get to her last high school game was it. She wasn't able to move on, and that was a little disappointing. And I don't know how we would have traveled around in high school, even in the Philadelphia area, in the league that her school played in, was still a pretty wide maybe travel for a half an hour to an hour to get to a game. But it was, we loved going. It was something that got me out of the house. And as long as it wasn't, we went to a game or two when it was snowing. So it's nice that it, in Division III, at least they still get to play, and they get to play. And if they're good enough, they've gotten a scholarship. So they're going to college for free, without that debt.
Yep.
So with you and the, and I'll put links to everything in the show notes. So you're still selling the equipment, and I thought of this as we talked about earlier. I thought of this because it's very similar to when I had the salon supplies and interiors, which was salon equipment and beauty supplies, where one of the things that we did was buy and sell used equipment. When a salon was remodeling, they had equipment to sell. And, sometimes they bought the new equipment from us. So, we gave them a trade-in or something like that. Other times they were looking just to get rid of it and basically used us to clean out their place. And on more than one occasion, we never talked about a price that we were going to pay for used equipment. And the guy never talked about a price of how much it would cost for us to come and clean his place out. So, they kind of avoided each other, my guys and the salon owner, because nobody wanted to pay. We didn't want to pay for the equipment, and the guy didn't want to pay us. And, so we were both happy, I think, at the end of that, because we got some nice equipment that wasn't very old, and he got his place cleaned out of the, the bulk of the equipment. So, so you still do that, and remind me again what the website is so people can check that out. And again, I'll put the stuff in the show notes, but remind me what that website is.
Sure, it's midwaymarketplace.com. And if I had to do over again, I would have picked a different name because, one, it's hard for people to say or remember midwaymarketplace.com, and two, carnivals are only referred to as Midways in North America. So when I started the business, my intent was for it to be a global website, because the other people that were already doing what I wanted to do, they focused pretty much only on the United States and Canada and maybe a little Mexico. So I wanted it to be international in scope. And without really knowing it, I picked a name that landed itself for people to think that I was only focused on the U.S. market.
Okay. And what outside of the U.S., what would it be called?
Well,
Like something like that?
in Latin America, they call them La Ferias. In the UK and Europe, they will either refer to them as fun fairs or just as fairground rides. And in Australia, they call them carnivals, but they don't use the term midway.
Okay.
And
Canada is the same. Is Canada midway? Is that okay?
Midways in Canada, and it's a term that was coined during at the 1908 World's Fair, because it was literally midway between the industrial type exhibits and the sideshow area with all the freaks and the games of chance and the horror museums and stuff like that. There was a few animals and a few rides midway between those two other setups at the World's Fair, which is where it comes from. But so yeah, and I've enjoyed doing it. I still do it because, and I don't say this to be immodest, but compared to the rest of the people who broker amusement equipment, I'm the only person who I never worry about my ethics. Okay. I'm the most legit, honest, ethical person brokering amusement rides anywhere. And a lot of that comes from the fact that I've had to deal with some of these other people on sales where I represented the buyer and they represented the seller, or vice versa. And I've also had occasions where I've sold rides that larger brokerage companies thought were their privately owned listings, and they basically made my life miserable because I sold a piece of equipment they didn't think I had a right to sell. So I've had more than my fair share of bad experiences with the other brokers and with ride owners who think, well, this is the way everybody else does it. Why can't you just do it that way? And my response is, that's just not the way I want to do it. One of the most common pricing schemes, and I use that word on purpose, is to add the commission to the asking price of the equipment. Well, what everybody else does that uses that model is the equipment will be listed for 3, if not 4 times what the owner is trying to get for it.
Wow.
That means you're going to make more money than he is. Now, they do that knowing that people are going to haggle on the price, but they're still expecting to make more on that ride than the owner does. The worst part of it is that when people see those prices, even if they figure in their minds, okay, they'll come down off that price a little, a lot of times those prices discourage people they keep people from making sales. And I come at this from a different point of view. I grew up in a small family-owned carnival. If we wanted to buy something newer, we had to sell something we already had. So I've come at it from a position of, this used to be the life or death for my business, and I know the position a lot of these people are in, and I just couldn't see myself taking advantage of that. And the best example I can give you of that is right now, because with the pandemic, a lot of carnivals did qualify and receive the payment protection program money, but a lot of them are still going to have trouble because so much of their equipment is on credit or on lease. And if they're not bringing in a certain amount of income every week, every month, they're going to lose their equipment. People asked me recently, Max, are you still selling equipment? And I'm like, not right now, because the only people with any money to spend are vultures looking to, snap up equipment for 5 or 10 cents on the dollar, put it in their warehouse, and hopefully when things get back to normal in a year or two, either add it to their midway or turn around and sell it for 5 or 10 times what they paid for it. And I just can't be part of that. This just isn't how I was built. And it's probably why my family was never more successful with our carnival, is we just didn't have the whatever it is, the Barnum gene to really take advantage of people.
Right. And you you mentioned about buying and selling this stuff. In a previous life, so long ago it seems now, I had a video store, and to make room on the shelves, it wasn't more to raise funds to buy those movies, but to make room, because you just can't keep, if you had 24 copies of something, 3 months later you didn't need 24 copies of that movie. Maybe you needed 8 or 10 or 12, whatever, and you needed the room in the store. So you had to constantly pick and choose and move. And when you were talking about the popcorn machine, we did have one in our store too, which every weekend we made popcorn, and it made this store smell like the movies and everything else. So that kind of gave me a flashback. So how was the segue from doing the carnival stuff to what you do now, basically the podcast and becoming an author and a public speaker and a PR guy? How did that all transpire?
All right. It was as many as you've heard a lot of my story. Most of the things I've done in the last 10 years were not really intentional. A lot of it has to do with good friends who have come along and said, Max, maybe you should try this, or we think you'd be good at something, and deciding to give it a try. And where this all started is, in 2007, I started the Midway Marketplace, and I had to learn so much new stuff. I mean, just the ride part of it. I had no experience with state fair quality rides. I had no experience with amusement park equipment, with zoo equipment. So many. Plus, I had never had a website, and of course, at that time, a lot of people had never had a website. This was before WordPress, before Wi-Fi, and before Facebook. The only social media at that time was MySpace, and it was nothing like It was nothing like what we have now,
Right.
and that's not in a good way. So I'm pretty much having to learn this stuff as I go. And because I was blind, and at the time there wasn't a WordPress or a Wix or a Weebly or a GoDaddy, you had two choices. You could either use a program that would allow you to build your website with what they called "what you see is what you get," or WYSIWYG. And
Right.
obviously, WYSIWYG would not work for a guy who has light perception. Or you could learn to code your own HTML. And I kept asking people for help, hoping somebody would give me a better answer. And eventually they said, well, why don't you go through the W3C school tutorials, and after you've gone through them, come back to us and ask us questions, and we'll probably be able to help you more at that time. So I did it, and I learned how to create the homepage and links and embed photos and embed videos, and add the link where people could click and send you an email. And I learned that stuff one thing at a time. And so I created a website. Then after I had the website, people said I really needed to have a blog. So I found out about Mars Edit, which is a great third-party app for Apple users that want to blog, because you pretty much just create your blog posts as a text document and you tell it, you want to put a link here, you want to put a picture here, and then you press send, and it does everything else on the backside with WordPress or Blogger or whichever blog platform you're using. And it's also great because you can create your posts even if you're offline and just upload them when you're online again. So
Okay.
I find that, and I used Blogspot, which was the free WordPress at the time. So I'm doing that. Next thing is people aren't opening my emails. They aren't returning my phone calls because I'm a new guy and I'm asking people to pay me commissions for selling their equipment, something none of my competitors were asking them to do. And so I had to say, well, how do I get people to open my emails? And I started building pages of links to businesses in the amusement industry, and I would create the link with their name and website and address and phone number and stuff, and I would send them the link to it on my website. I would say, hey, I just added this free link. It'll help people find you on the internet, and all you have to do is let me send you an email once a week, and it'll stay up there. If not, I'll take it back down. And nobody ever said take it down. So I started building an email list. Eventually, Facebook would come along, and LinkedIn and Twitter, and I start using social media. So at a point, people started saying, Max, we're really impressed with the way you take on all these difficult challenges and find ways to overcome them. We would really love to hear more about what it's like to be an entrepreneur who happens to be blind. And so at the time, I thought, okay, I need a second website. So I started a second website as the Blind Blogger. Very bad mistake. Unless you absolutely have to, don't ever have more than one website, because it's just, instead of twice the work, it's like 4 times the work. And friends tried to tell me not to do it, but I felt like there were 2 different communities, 2 different worlds of people, and I needed a new website. So
Right.
people had been calling me the Blind Blogger on LinkedIn for a while. So when I decided to start a second website, they said, see if that's available. And the .com wasn't, but the .net it was. So I became the Blind Blogger. I started writing blog posts. And since I had been recording videos for the Midway Marketplace, I started recording videos for the Blind Blogger. Of course, I didn't think of it as a podcast. I thought, I'm just recording some videos. I'm just sharing my thoughts. And so, let's see. I'm promoting my blog on social media and on other people's websites. One of my favorite ways to promote a blog post is to comment on other people's blogs, because you get to read content, and every time you comment, it's a chance for somebody to see what you thought about the post and hopefully follow you back to your homepage. And one day I replied to a woman who was writing about creating small books as gifts you can give in exchange for people to sign up to your email list. Those are called lead magnets for people who don't know yet. And I said, I love your post, but it would have been great if you had given some more, concrete, actual advice on how somebody does this. And so that led to a conversation, and she invited me to be part of a virtual summit. And she challenged me to write my first book to be part of the summit, because she said that people will expect you to have something that they can either get for free or at a deep discount in exchange for watching the summit and signing up for the summit's email list. So I started writing the book. A couple months later, she came and said, Max, there are 4 other women on this event, and they've decided for advertising purposes, it would be better if it was all women. So you're out. And I said, hey, it's not a problem. I come from the carnival world. I spent most of my life promoting stuff. I know what it means to want to put feet on the ground, butts in the seats, and in this case, faces behind the screen. So I said, but I'm going to keep writing the book. So the book, with the help of my editor, Lorraine Reguly, who is at wordingwell.com, and I have to mention her because my first book would have gotten published without her, but it would have taken much longer, and it wouldn't have been as visually appealing to people. It wouldn't have been as readable on the Kindle and the other ebook reading devices. So I have to make sure I mention her, and me and her are working on my 4th book now, which is only 2 years late. But thankfully, with this pandemic, I've got 2 more books worth of material from past adventures. So hopefully before, between now and the time we have a vaccine and people start traveling more again, hopefully I will finish both of the books that I have material for and go on. But so I finished the book. The book was titled Leading You Out of the Darkness into the Light, A Blind Man's Inspirational Guide to Success. And it has 11 exercises in it that people can work through to help them take steps towards accomplishing their big goal or dream. If they will send me an email to maxwellivey@aol.com and ask for the book, I will send them the audio book for free. You don't have to sign up for nothing. I'm not going to capture your email address. I'm not going to write you unless you want me to. But I feel like in these times, it's the least I can do to help support all the people who are stuck at home in isolation. And hopefully they will make some progress. And by the time life starts to get to look more like it used to, they will have actually taken steps towards accomplishing their goal. Because, just because we are in isolation, as we're seeing proved every day on social media and on the talk shows, just because we're in isolation doesn't mean we can't do things to benefit ourselves. So if they'll send me the email, I'll send them the audio of the first book, because I know everybody likes audio better than the text. And so that was the first book. From that book, I competed for and won the Amtrak Writers in Residence. And I used my prize to go to New York City for 2 weeks by myself. And my most recent book is about that experience as the Blind Blogger traveling solo to New York. going back to when I was just Mr. Midway, I had started doing radio interviews in 2013. I, then started doing some podcast interviews in 2014. And people just kept asking, Max, you're a great interview. When are you going to have your own podcast? And I would tell them, when I find somebody to handle the technical side of it, so all I have to do is show up and have a conversation. And of course, you never want to say stuff like that out loud because it usually happens. And my good friend Frederick Bai showed up and he said, Max, I'll handle everything. I'll even upload the audio and handle the podcast stuff. All you have to do is talk. And so did that for a while. And then he convinced me that I didn't need him to do the show, but he's still a great friend. He still encourages me. So the podcast is called the What's Your Excuse Show. It was originally Leading You Out of the Darkness and then No Excuses, but I think I've finally settled on a name. And the podcast is very, very seat of the pants-esque. I mean, I tell people that my interviews are recorded live, meaning I will not be editing it. If they say something they didn't want to say, then we're both in trouble because I ain't going to do it,
Right.
My whole approach to life is we have to do what we can do right now as soon as possible. And I know from my own experience that if I edited my podcast, it either would never go live or it would take me such a long time that instead of having a goal of once a week, I'd have a goal of maybe once a month. So for me, viewing it as a recorded live podcast and not editing works for me in my No Excuses brand. The podcast and the fact that I did all those interviews over the year led to people asking me, how do I get booked on podcasts? And then asking me, well, Max, can you teach me how to get booked on podcasts? And then it's to, Max, that's too much work. Can you just get me booked on podcasts? So that's one of the things I do now. I love connecting creative entrepreneurs with opportunities to get exposure and beyond podcasts, including online magazines, virtual summits, actual radio and television shows. And just recently I discovered that I love helping people get exposure for what they're doing, because the one thing I've learned is that no matter how good it looks like somebody is doing to me from the outside, a lot of times that person that's doing great work doesn't have the time, energy, or confidence to do the outreach, to ask people to come on their show or to ask other hosts if they can be on the podcast. So that gives me a lot of satisfaction. I enjoy doing it. And just recently I started a new thing that I'm really loving. I've had one beta client so far. I'm looking forward to starting with some actual clients very soon. And that is a lot of people want to share their stories. They want to promote their businesses on online media, but they've never done it before. So now I've created a course where I'm going to work people through the process of becoming the next podcast guest rock star, as I like to refer to it. And, it includes helping them understand what their story is, the power of their story, and learning how to tell their story better. And then, we do sample question and answer sessions that are recorded so they can look back on them later. And then I interview them for my podcast, What's Your Excuse? And then I get them booked on 4 podcasts. And before and after each podcast, I have a session with them where I remind them of the things that we've talked about before. And then I go over the most recent interview with them and, see if hopefully they will understand on their own. But if they don't, help them to understand, well, here's where you could have given a stronger, more positive answer, or here's where you should have, just really been more honest and more authentic and let people see the vulnerable side. It just depends on the person and the show, and of course, what their goals are, because a self-help author can be a lot more authentic than a business coach.
Right. And, with that course, and is that the one that I was having a look around a day or two ago at your website? Is that the one that's listed on that page with your books? Is that the one?
Is it the one that said the one I'm talking about is the one that says 8 weeks?
8 weeks. Yeah, I don't know that was it because it's kind of seemed like the one was a video course.
Oh, okay. That's the online. That's the on the air course. That's an audio course.
Okay, right, on the air. That's right.
Yeah,
that's what.
Yeah,
that's
on my store page, and that's a 13 audio course that walks people through the entire process of getting booked on podcasts, from why you would want to do it, how you do it, what you want to do after the show is over, and how to handle nerves and mistakes and outright failures. So I think I did a good job covering pretty much everything people would need to know. And, if they click on that link on my store page, they can download that audio. It's it's an email subscription thing because it'll send them the next audio every 3 days. Okay. But as anything else, they're welcome to unsubscribe after they've gone through the course. My goal with the course is to help people, because I know not everybody wants to hire somebody like me, and not everybody can afford to hire somebody like me. But I can't personally think of anyone who can't benefit by telling their story in places where other people can hear it, and hopefully begin the process of the like, no, trust progression, so that they can find new clients or sell their products and services.
Okay, so the new course does that have a separate website?
Yeah,
or
the new course is you're right. I need to add it to the store page. The new course is theblindblogger.net/8 weeks, the number 8.
8 weeks. Okay. And I'll put that in the show notes, so folks who want to sign up for that and get on board with that. And I noticed that, and I'm hoping as things progress, my hope. I thought I was going to be in Houston in July for the NFB convention, and I thought, that would give us a chance to connect, whether you went to the convention or not. We could connect there. After that, I know you had probably had ideas of coming to, used to be called MapCon. I think it's called IndieCon now, or IndiePodCon in South Jersey in September, and fingers are crossed that still happens. So, hopefully, I mean, you would have plans to come to that, right? I mean, that was something you'd be looking into.
I've already pitched the submission process to speak at the event, and so yeah, I'm hopeful of being there. I was hopeful of speaking here in Houston the second week of May, but that doesn't look like that's going to happen. So that's one of the things about being a speaker is, even though we can pretty much assume all of the events have been canceled for the next few months, you still have to keep sending out those emails and filling out those submission forms, because if things were to improve faster than most people expect they will, and you decided not to pitch an event, especially a paid event, you'd feel really bad if it was safe to travel to an event and you passed on a $2,500 fee or a $5,000 fee.
Right.
You'd feel pretty bad about not having filled out that form, even though in the last 2 days, I've gotten 4 emails from one service I subscribe to saying that the submissions for these events have been automatically canceled, so.
Okay. And how did you, I'm sorry, go ahead.
But you have to keep pressing send, it's just the nature of being a speaker or a podcaster or a podcast guest.
Right. And as far as speaking goes, and I know we had talked about this when we were down in Orlando, how do you, and this is something that I've, been wrestling with, because I don't, like you with my podcast, I record live for the most part. I mean, if there's some sort of, loud noise or whatever, I start coughing and didn't hit the pause button because I couldn't find it. I'll go back through and try and find that and take it out. How do you, when you speak to a live audience, how do you go through your notes? I know for a few minutes, maybe even up to 10 or 15, I have no trouble. This is what I want to remember. Here's what I'm going to tell them, but I don't have anything to go on. How do you do it? How do you speak to folks when you have somebody tells you to speak for half an hour?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the first thing I had to do, and this was really hard, I had to just accept the fact that I can either focus on my talk and providing information, entertainment, or inspiration, or I can focus on the time. I'm not built in a way where I can do both.
Okay.
So, and I actually had this epiphany when I was speaking at the Indie PodCon back in September of last year. So, what I do is I tell myself, okay, Max, you have about 20 minutes or 30 minutes. These are the stories that you can probably tell in that time limit, and these are the lessons you can teach off of those. And if you come up short, you just go to question and answer. If they come up and tap you on the shoulder, then you just finish the story you're in the middle of quickly. You make the point that you wanted to make, and you thank them for being there and go on. And that's what pretty much at Podfest back in March, I felt like I had pretty much used up my time. So I went to my last story, which was the story about the lady podcaster from Missouri. And then I sang a little bit and I said, I'm done. And while y'all were applauding, I asked Lee Silverstein standing next to me, I said, how did I do? He said, you donated 2 minutes back to the room. And I was very happy with that, you know?
Okay.
So it's just one of those things. If being short or long on time is going to affect the way you feel about the experience of giving the talk in the first place, then that's the problem. And that's what I had to get past, is the whole idea of worrying about the time was preventing me from enjoying the experience and was possibly keeping me from expressing myself 100% the way I would have if I weren't thinking about the time.
Right. I'm thinking even just that short time that we had at Podfest, when we went on stage and I did the shout out for David Bennett. I know they had devices that were there to prompt folks who were speaking. I guess they had a clock. Of course I couldn't see it like you couldn't see it. So, I kind of framed in my mind what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. And sometimes that doesn't, just because it's in my mind, it doesn't necessarily come out that way. We were in Washington in February pitching, lobbying Congress. And after one of our meetings with some congressional aides, so one of the guys I was with and said, yeah, oh, and by the way, this is called, I don't remember what I had said, but he said it's closed captioning, not closed circuit. I didn't even know I had said that. And, again, just talking about things when you have stories, and that's the same thing like you, when I do talk to folks, whether I'm, presenting for NFB Newsline or something in our NFB chapter, I try to keep that in mind. And, again, sometimes things are going to slip out funny. And, obviously as I get older, that's going to happen. So, I'm just interested to hear, I talked to someone else about how they prepare. He said, oh, you always have to have notes in front of you. I said, well, what kind of notes am I going to have in front of me? I can't see to read them and I don't know Braille. And if you saw my hands today, my one finger is so fat and swollen and discolored, and there's no way I'd be, at this point, I'm beyond Braille. So, so it's good to get your opinion there with that.
Right. And the other thing I do is as you know, I'm a storyteller. So a lot of these stories I've told more than once, and I can kind of approximate how long it takes me to tell the story. And so it then becomes basically like a music playlist. I'm like, okay, I have 30 minutes. How many hits on the playlist can I play? And which ones do I want to play? And once you've told a story a bunch of times, then it really does become like a virtual bullet point in your brain that, this is a story. I've told this story, and this story takes, however long to tell it. Like, and when you tell a story, you can also anticipate, is this a story that I usually get applause from, or is this a story I usually get laughter from? And then of course you have to figure that in as well. But to me, my bullet points are in my brain. They're the story titles of the stories I want to tell and the lessons I want people to learn from those stories. And we had this conversation on my show, and that is, and I think we pretty much agreed that for the most part, visually impaired people, a lot of us have, or at least when we were younger, had better than average memories, because it was pretty much the only way we could get things done was to develop a great memory and to develop memory aids. And to me, my stories are my bullet points. And I'm sure you probably do a little bit of the same thing. And if the great thing about being a blind speaker is, if I run long, they're at least not going to yell at me. They're not going to push me off they're not going to push me down the steps of the stage or nothing,
Right.
And the really cool thing is more than once after I've given a talk where there was time built in for questions, I've gotten some really great questions from the sighted audience. And one of my favorite ones was 2 falls ago in New York at a WordCamp event. One of the people in the audience, one of the organizers of the event, admitted that he had been losing his vision, that he had been afraid to tell his coworkers or anybody in their chapter of the WordCamp organization that he was losing his vision. He was trying to hide it. And because of my talk, for the first time, he admitted publicly that he was losing his vision, what the disease was, and how he felt about the prospect of losing his vision. So those are some of the things that happen. As you mentioned once before with my tagline, and it applies to you too. If we could do it, then what's your excuse? And I think to hear me talk so openly about my vision loss and how that had affected my ability to have adventures and to have a business and stuff like that gave him the freedom to admit to something that he had been hiding for a while.
Right. And that's I have a someone I know did the same type of thing, and she was an art director at a big New York City place, and she started losing her vision, and it just progressed to the point where she couldn't do her job anymore, and she tried to hide it for as long as she could, because she didn't, she thought, if I have to do all this stuff, and they see that I can't see as well as maybe some other folks, that that might cost her, might have cost her a job. And she eventually realized, look, she's got to move on, because it's not something that was sustainable. So so it's just interesting that what it takes for folks to just finally say, look, I am having difficulty. And sometimes I get it, with certain diseases like glaucoma, where it slowly creeps in. You might not notice it right away, so it's important to get checked and all that. But you don't want to deny it, because you can do stuff. And folks who look at you and say, hey, look, that guy's a speaker and he's a coach and he's helping folks get on podcasts and radio and interviews, and it's just something that you just got to do it. You just have to do it. You can't sit around and wait and wonder. And it's something that that you have instilled in folks that listen to your podcast, that I try to instill in folks both blind and sighted, that look, again, like that girl that has the magic wand white cane, we said to her, look, you got to get a bigger white cane, and then you'll be more comfortable going out. And it's you going to New York, and everything that I do, the first time you do it, it is scary. And, as I said, when I first went into Philadelphia on my own on the train, I felt like Neil Armstrong when I walked in. I got to the meeting, the spot for the meeting. People do it every day. Maybe not now, but, and to me, it was a big deal. And now every time I do it, I'm like, wow, I used to think this was something special. And now it's, run of the mill, old hat. And it's just a matter of getting out of your comfort zone, I think, at the beginning to do it. And then once you do it, you're good, and you gain more confidence, and you realize you can do things that you thought you couldn't do.
Right. I tell people all the time, you have to start really, really small. When I finally decided I was no longer going to be in the carnival business as a traveling carnival owner, the only thing I did in the first 6 months was to file for a domain name. And, it was after then that we actually figured out how I was going to be able to build and maintain a website. And so, in the beginning, the only people that would list equipment with me were people I knew, friends, family, people who knew my dad. Eventually, I'd be able to get listings from people all, on 5 continents. You have to start really, really small. You have to appreciate the good feelings that comes from accomplishing those beginning building blocks that will get you to where you want to go. As you know, I'm known for using the river in my podcast and when I talk, and a lot of that is because my story, my journey is definitely not a straight line, and for the most part, it's basically been like people who have come along who have pushed me in different directions, and most of the time, those directions have been good, and every once in a while, those directions have been. It sounded good at the time, but it's not working. So we're gonna go in a different direction now. But it started with very, very, very small steps, and feeling the satisfaction that came with accomplishing those small objectives in the beginning. And if people want to look at, just how, how I've told the story before about my first website. When I first built my first website, it was visually unappealing, but I was able to sell equipment because I focused on driving traffic to that website and connecting people and letting people see what was for sale. But I was able to do that because I was happy I could build a website at all. I mean, to me, being able to build a website was a big thing because I didn't have the money to hire somebody to do it.
Right.
I didn't know anybody who would do it for me. And, to find a way to build a crappy website was an accomplishment.
Right.
I know that sounds backwards, but that's the way I felt about it.
Right. Again, it's kind of like Chris Crimitzo says, look, you started ugly and that's how you did it. And it got done. It wasn't perfect, but it got the job done and you progressed from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I like his book title, Start Ugly.
Yeah. So, Max, I really appreciate you coming on today and being so inspiring and becoming a good friend that I enjoy talking with. Obviously, we've talked for quite a while here. Where can people find you if they want to get in contact with you?
Right. They can go to theblindblogger.net, theblindblogger.net. They can also send me an email to justask@theblindblogger.net. The website, and on there you can find links to pretty much anything you would want to find from me: the courses, the books, the What's Your Excuse merchandise, and of course my latest podcast episode. And so if you see it, you see a title of an episode that you're interested in, you click the link and it'll then be available on all of your favorite podcast players. So theblindblogger.net's where they want to go.
Okay. And again, Max, I appreciate you joining me today. Thanks again for coming on.
Well, I appreciate you having me. It's been great getting to know you and becoming friends with you. And I also want to let you know that as a fellow podcaster, I appreciate the time and effort you put into this, the money, the energy, the passion. If it weren't for people like you, then I wouldn't have a place to share my story. And I certainly wouldn't have come as far as I've come now because, there have been a lot of times where it was the comments of a podcast host or a radio host or the connections I made with them that allowed me to keep going until, the next thing came along. So I really appreciate you doing this, not only for me, but for everybody else who comes on your show.
My thanks again to you, Max. And all the show notes, as we've talked about here on today's episode, will be available at ican'tseeyou.com/072, ican'tcu.com/072. Remember, just 7 letters, not a whole sentence, even though it sounds like it. And I appreciate you listening. Remember, if you want to get in contact with me, you can dial 646-926-6350. You can leave me a voicemail, and I'll probably use it on an upcoming episode. You have up to 3 minutes, so think about what you want to say before you get on there. Just 3 minutes. Try and make it a little shorter, maybe. If you don't want to record an audio, you can certainly email me, ican'tseeyou@gmail.com, ICANTCU podcast@gmail.com. And once again, I appreciate you listening to episode 72 of the I Can't See You podcast. Have a great day out there and wash your hands.
Thank you for listening to the I Can't See You podcast. Follow David on Twitter. He is at David Benj.